Welcome. You're listening to Literacy Now, the official podcast for the nonprofit organization Parents for Reading Justice, and I am your host, Brett Tingley. Todd Collins is one of the organizers of the California Reading Coalition and a school board member in Palo Alto, California. California Reading Coalition is a group of educators, advocates, researchers, and policymakers who are committed to improving reading outcomes for all California students. We are very excited to have Todd with us today. Is there anything that I missed in your introduction that you would like to share with us, Todd?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Brett. It's a pleasure to be here. And I love talking about reading to basically anybody who'll listen. I'd say the most important thing to know about me is I'm an accidental education advocate. I'm just a business person. Here in Palo Alto, I've got a long career in business, and I took a wrong turn at some point and wound up on my local school board. And I never thought when I joined the school board in 2016 that that reading would be one of the areas that I focused on. The idea that it would benefit from my focus would have mystified me. And the idea that we had a problem there would have been very surprising. I assumed, like most people, that our schools knew how to take care of reading pretty well. So I was very surprised when I joined our board and found after a couple of years that we were doing a really bad job teaching especially low-income kids how to read effectively. And we could see it very clearly in our numbers. We're a very large percent, 80% of low-income Latino students in our district, which is a large group in almost any California district, were below grade level in third grade, 80%. And so that was really, that was mystifying to me, especially when we then compared it to districts around the state and found out not only was it quite a bit lower than affluent families in our district, it was lower than similar low-income Latino kids at other districts. We were doing a really bad job, despite the fact that, in Palo Alto, where I live, we're a very well-resourced school district that has a lot of high-achieving students. So as we dug into that, and we can talk more about this if you like, as we dug into that, we found that, as with most things, we had the results we had for a reason. And that the reason wasn't just idiosyncratic to Palo Alto. It was something that we saw in schools all over California, and that there was lots of opportunity to improve results for California students. So anyway, I think of myself as an accidental advocate because I didn't set out to do this, and it wasn't on the script. But it has ended up being, I think, one of the more important things I've done in my career.
That is very interesting because you were probably the first person. First of all, you're rare because you're a man. Many times, I think women outnumber you 2 or 3 to 1 in this universe, but also that you do not have a struggling reader. Is that correct? A dyslexic child?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I know many people who get involved in this are motivated because they had a child or a family member who struggled in school and they wanted to advocate for that person, or they learned about it that way. I didn't. We do have my family. I have 3 children, one of whom has a severe disability. My son Harry, who's now 23, is severely autistic. But his disability didn't didn't have anything to do with my getting involved with this. It really, and we can talk more about this in the role of school boards later if you like. When I joined our school board, one of the first questions I asked was, how do we know if we're doing a good job? How do we know? Because, in Palo Alto, where I live, where people are very proud of the schools are well regarded. It says on our website we're the #1 school district in California, so somebody thinks that. But I thought, now that I'm on the school board, I shouldn't just take that for granted. It's like I should know. And so I asked, how do we know? How are we so confident that we're the #1 school district? And the answer was, well, look at our great test scores. And we do have great test scores. The kids get great test scores on the state tests. But that there was something missing there. It was pretty clear to me there was something missing because my one child has a severe disability. My other two children, I was pretty confident that they would do well on these state standardized tests, regardless of where they went to school. I didn't go to fancy schools. I didn't go to schools nearly as good as the ones we have in Palo Alto. And I certainly, and everybody I knew, did fine on those tests. So I thought, that says more about our families than it does about our schools. So that can't be the answer about why our schools are good. And nobody really pushed back or disagreed with that, but nobody had another answer. And so, as my wife likes to say, other people have friends and hobbies. I have these kinds of obsessions. And so I couldn't, for the next couple of years, I had to figure out how we would know whether we were actually a good school district or not. At some point, one of the assistant superintendents in my district said something that really had a big impact on me. She said, we can't call ourselves a great school district unless we get great results for our least resourced and most challenged students. And I wrote that down. And I have a prop. I don't have it with me today. I have this framed in my office. Because that's not only a moral statement about, what we should be trying to do. I thought it was also a really insightful empirical statement. And so, we ought to be able to look at how our least resourced and most challenged students were performing. And that would tell us a lot about how effective we were as a school district. Because if we weren't teaching the hard to reach kids, then we weren't doing our job. If we fail those kids, we're just failing. And so, that set me on a task of, kind of looking at that question analytically and getting the data about our district and other districts in California, and eventually figuring out that, in fact, we didn't do a good job at serving our least resourced and most challenged students, which sent us on a journey to figure out how we could do a better job. So anyway, it was interesting for me because I came at it. I'm just a business person kind of with an analytical background. And I just kind of tried to answer the question that I thought was my job as a school board member, and try to understand where we were falling short and what we needed to do to go better. And it turned out, the timing was good because all over the country, there were places that were really digging into this, and Emily Hanford work had shone a real spotlight on it for the more general public. And so anyway, it became a movement that was bigger than me, bigger than my district, where we throughout California found people who were really engaged in this problem.
Well, and that is interesting because I'm an engineer and an MBA, so I also have that corporate background or business background. And the data I'm curious how you got that data, because if I were on the school board and I said, hand me that data, I don't know that they would they might now, but when I first started doing this work, they wouldn't have been able to give me that data. How did you guys have to work through how to get this data, or was it readily available already?
There's a lot of data. The data was available, but like most data, like most things, the challenge really it wasn't so much getting the data, it's figuring out the right questions to ask and then having clear and crisp answers around them. I say maybe fortunately, luckily, maybe unluckily, it turns out that's what I've spent most of my professional life doing, is kind of analytically framing questions and figuring out how to answer them using data that's out there in the world. And so, but it took me probably 2 years of stumbling around, from the time I first said, hey, I really want to figure out if we're doing a good job or not, to saying, holy smokes, in this particular area, figuring out how to even ask that question, what data would actually illuminate it, who I had to compare it to. We spent a lot of time, and I think we see this in a lot of districts, people compare subgroups within the district, the so-called achievement gap between different ethnicities or income groups. And one of the things I ended up including, at least in the context of my district in Palo Alto, is that wasn't terribly informative. That, again, told us more about the families than it did about the schools. I kind of knew that wealthy families that had deep educational backgrounds gave more educational resources to their kids than low-income immigrant families. I didn't think there was a lot of insight to be gained there. And while it would be great if those kids had similar results, it didn't tell us whether we were doing a good job or not. It told us their families were different. So figuring out how to reframe that question in a way that we could actually illuminate some of what we were actually doing, how we were impacting it. That took a while, and then getting the data took a while. So in retrospect, if I knowing what I know now, it would have taken a month. Well, and that's why we try. It's funny because we just today released the latest version of what we call the California Reading Report Card, which ranks just under 300 districts in California for how they, on this particular thing, third grade reading for low-income Latino students. And this is the second time we've done it, and it's getting some attention. And we really, that analysis is, I think, one of the cores to try to get all districts to think about, are we doing a good job? Are we serving kids the way we need? And when you look at the data, it's pretty hard to conclude that you are. I mean, the number one district in California, which is called Bonita Unified, 53% of their low-income Latino kids are at grade level. Now, that's great. They're the number one school district in California. I'm glad they're doing it. They work really hard. I know them well. But no, the superintendent wrote me when I wrote to let him know. He wrote me back and said, "Thank you for letting me know that we're number one, but we're very disappointed with our result." And I applaud him for his perspective, because that's the one we all have to take. The average school district in California for our low-income Latino students has about 30% of the students at grade level. So that means 70% are below grade level. Most of those kids never catch up, as you know. So, this is an existential issue where teaching kids to read and read effectively has got to be, it's not the number one, certainly at the top of anybody's list of what schools are supposed to do. And if we're failing this very large group of kids, and as I said, we're not just failing these kids, it probably is a sign we're failing a lot more kids, but the parents of the families are picking them up. They're getting the support outside the schools. So we've got a huge job as educators and as leaders of school districts to figure out, what we need to do better, because we are not delivering the kind of results that we expect of ourselves.
Well, and one of the things you made me think of is it's very smart, and we try to do this as well, but you get the behavior that you measure. So what you choose to measure and track, make sure that it's really important and that you're measuring the right thing. Because like you said, they might be the number one district, but their results are not very good. And but the idea that if you set up the mechanism, a dashboard even, that measures these things that are so critical to ensuring student success, that is going to drive the district, especially if you are a school board member. You are the second school board member that I've had the opportunity to interview, and that is so smart. We did not do this in our own district because we were 10 years ago, and we were still able to flip our district. But the idea of going into the power structure from within and changing that way, I think is very powerful. Because as a parent, you're looking in from the outside and you think, how do I change this? And they're fighting me and they're not listening to me. But if you're on the school board, you're hiring and firing the superintendent. So
yeah, I mean, like you said, you have kind of a corporate perspective, which I think is helpful in this regard. This is advice I give a lot of people who ask, how can I make change in my school district? If you go, certainly you can talk to the principal, you can talk to the head of curriculum instruction, you can talk to the superintendent. However, most all of those people who are professional educators, trained, this is their profession, they've been doing their jobs a long time, they almost uniformly view parents as meddling amateurs. And that's not, and you know what? Largely, they're right. Parents don't know a lot about how education is delivered. Parents know a lot. Don't get me wrong. Parents are incredibly important in the whole scheme of things. But you don't want, as the school district shouldn't be just getting the advice. It shouldn't be just like McDonald's doesn't have the customers come into the kitchen and tell them how to cook the fries. You don't want the parents to come in and tell you this is how you should teach reading. But there isn't. So the whole educational edifice is designed to deflect that kind of parent engagement in kind of changing the way the work is done, because you're meddling amateurs and we're professionals. But the part of the edifice that is designed to be responsive to parent input and community input is the school board. And school boards are not experts on curriculum. The vast majority of school boards and the vast majority of places are part-time volunteers like me. I'm not a professional politician. I'm not a professional educator. I'm just a part-time volunteer who got elected to school board. So I happen to have educated myself a lot about reading, but the vast majority of school board members haven't, never will. But what their job is to listen to the community. And when the community raises issues, they are supposed to make those issues priority for the district. Because as you said, Brett, they hire and fire the CEO, the superintendent, who I think of as the CEO of the district. They hire and fire that person. They do their annual performance review. They set their compensation. They set what their goals are. That's their job. That's the number one job the board is supposed to do. And the way they do that is they should listen to the families and say, these are the things that we hear from our community should be top priorities. So this is what happened in my district is, it started with the dyslexia moms. I don't know what to call them.
That's what we're called.
We had a group of dyslexia moms. Yeah. Just like in your community, we had dyslexia moms in our community. And they came to our board and said, we need to focus on, this is probably 2017, is we need to focus on dyslexia. We don't screen for dyslexia. We don't treat dyslexia. We don't understand dyslexia. And you as a district need to focus on dyslexia. We thought that we as the board were very impressed by their presentation and thought this is a great idea, because if this is really a way that we could put resources against helping even 5 or 10% of our struggling kids, that was a fantastic way to use resources. So, they got the ball rolling on us thinking about early literacy as a problem, as something that we didn't know, that we didn't understand parts of it, and we needed to do things differently. It became very important that the board adopted that perspective. The board embraced the idea that early literacy was a top problem and was something we should focus on. And ultimately, as we saw more opportunity and understood the problem better, we saw it as bigger than it was dyslexic students, but also struggling readers generally. It implicated our curriculum approach. We were a Lucy Calkins district with F&P Bass as our assessment. We had a bunch of, we had that constellation of practices that tend to be really bad for kids that don't have strong literacy backgrounds in the home and or going to struggle with foundational skills. And so we kind of understood that this was a big problem, that, our district was really digging in with something that wasn't going to work, that wasn't working effectively. And so ultimately, the board led the idea. The board drove early literacy as a priority. And we went to our superintendent, and the board ultimately voted to say, hey, we should make early literacy one of the top priorities of our district. And now it's one of the top, we have 5 priorities. Early literacy is one of them. And we should focus a lot of our resources. We should have specific goals around how we want to improve, how fast, what subgroups. And we don't, the board didn't dictate this is how you're going to do it. We didn't adopt the science of reading. We didn't tell them you have to change assessments or change curriculum. We didn't do those things. We said, hey, that's your job as the staff to figure that stuff out. What we're going to do is say this is a top priority and set quantitative goals over the next 3 to 5 years for you to hit, using whatever means that you think are appropriate. And that was enough. And that I think was the board doing its job. The board didn't try to usurp the expertise of the educators, but the board set the priorities and set the goals.
That's interesting to me because we did something similar. We presented to our school board, and our school board looked over at the district and said, are we doing everything we should be? And they said, yes, you are. And so the idea that you were receptive and open, and again, this was 10 years ago, before Emily Hamford, and we are in, I live very close to Ohio State University, which is Fontana and Pinnell and Reading Recovery. We were dug in deep. Yeah. So they thought that we were meddling amateurs, and we tried to reach out to the school board. What do you think was effective in their presentation that helped you change your mind so that you listen to the parents who are amateurs for education? And then the other part that's fascinating to me is that most of the districts do think that they are the experts because this is what they've gone to college for. And they are the experts, but the teacher prep programs are decades behind the science. So there's this weird interplay. How did that work out for you?
So I think there are a bunch of things going on there. One is that one of the things I've come to believe is that there's no sustainable progress without really effective buy-in by the teachers and the professional educators. And we actually saw this in California. I mean, if you go back 20 plus years, there was a woman in California who passed away recently called Miriam Joseph, who was the mother of who discovered the same problem in the mid 90s. And at that time we had whole language as our adopted curriculum statewide. And there was a startling thing when they first did NAEP state level scores, which I think is 92 or 94. And California was, I think, 49th out of 50 states. And that was a shock to everybody in California. We did not think of ourselves as cellar dwellers. And Miriam Joseph provided an answer, which is the same answer as today, that we weren't teaching foundational skills and we had basically done it wrong. So there was a very rapid shift, and then that was, supported by the Reading First movement when that came in at the national level in 2002 or 2003. The challenge was that was pushed from the top down without buy-in from the teachers and without alignment of the teacher preparation programs. As a result, the teachers, they did what they were told to do. They were handed curriculum and told to use it, and they did. But when the pressure went away in 2007, 2008, when Reading First wound up and there was regime change in California and this was no longer a top priority, the Open Court, which was the curriculum they were using, went to the dumpster. And we went back to the practices that the teachers felt comfortable with. Our results, which did rise during the early 2000s, kind of leveled off and started to go down again because we had these practices that were not very effective. But we'd failed to do one of the things that are necessary to sustain change, which is to educate everyone involved in the process about why the change is so important and why they should buy in. So that's one of the things I think we're trying to do differently this time is you've got to have buy-in from the educators. If the educators aren't supportive of the program, school boards can do whatever, legislators can do whatever. Very hard to sustain change if the entire organization doesn't buy in. Now, The challenge, of course, is that teacher preparation programs aren't teaching this. So as we found in many states, Mississippi started this, but many states have done it since, is you've got to provide training for your teachers so they understand both the whys and the hows behind stronger foundational skill instruction and science of reading generally. And we did that in Palo Alto. In Palo Alto, all K through 3 teachers, maybe even K through 5 teachers now, but it was K through 3 at the time, all reading specialists, all principals participated in Orton Gillingham training. I think we did it over the space of 2 years. And it gave everybody a consistent vocabulary and framework for understanding foundational skills that most of them never had been exposed to in their teacher preparation programs. And, I think significantly aligned people around the ideas that, hey, this is something we need to do better at. So I think that's something that has to happen. When I see states that mandate, in North Carolina or Mississippi or states that mandate large scale training for everyone in their system, I think that's actually really important because, the saying, know better, do better. If we don't give the teachers the know-how, then it's unreasonable to expect them to change their practices. Why would they?
But I'm interested, I want to know exactly, there's one little part. So you said to your superintendent, the CEO of the company, you said, we're going to start measuring you on your performance. You figure out how to do it, but we're going to start measuring you. How did the superintendent, did you say, hey, you might want to look at the science of reading or structured literacy? Or did you just say, go off and do that? How did, if they've never been educated in the science of reading or heard about it, how did they find it?
Sure. Well, in some ways they did, in some ways they didn't. I mean, I wouldn't hold my district out as, if you looked at the checklist of things science of reading advocates recommend, we're not doing all of them. We're not using Lucy Calkins and we're not using F&P Bass, but we're not using, CKLA as a curriculum, and we're not using Dibbles as an assessment tool either. And I think we still probably have some reading recovery in some places in the district. So it wasn't that part of my job as a meddling amateur, part of my contribution as a meddling amateur is I did share, hey, here are some things that I've learned that you might want to look into. But, one of the things I've learned, and I think appropriately so, is there's nothing more likely to make people resist a change than to have a board member enthusiastically promoting it. So I don't view that as my role. I'm a much bigger science of reading advocate outside my district than I am inside. Inside, I try to keep my mouth shut. I let them do their jobs. Because, as a board member, that's not I got to stay in my lane. My lane is set priorities and measure results, not tell people how to teach, not tell professional educators how to do the teaching. So, I share what I learn. I send the occasional article. I tell people about things that I hear that I think might be interesting, but it's really up to them to figure it out.
What are the consequences for not meeting those goals?
It's not there's no immediate consequence. This is set up as a goal for the district, which for us means a goal for the superintendent. The superintendent has an annual performance review, just like probably every superintendent in America. And student achievement has to be one of the important elements of his performance review. So there's no explicit, bonus tied to it, or, there's no formula. We don't have a formula for our performance review. But, we've established that this is a top priority for the district. And, I always say, one of the things I've said to my superintendent in the past, I say to other CEOs that I work with, it's like the results of CEOs are they're like baseball players. Their track record goes on the back of a baseball card. And you could be the nicest guy, and you could be the hardest working guy, and you can be incredibly effective at a bunch of different things. But at the end of the day, your win-loss record, your stats are on the back of the baseball card. And that's what we've got to see. And not every board member necessarily feels this way, but I do. And if I don't see the kind of results that we are hoping for and that the superintendent's committed to, then I'm going to think really hard about whether we're getting the kind of performance we want out of our district. So I think that's I have a business background. I sit on a lot of boards. I've been an executive at companies. This is just the way it's done in my part of the world. We like nice guys. We like people who work hard, but we like results. And I'd say, it's funny because I'd say that's as important as adopting specific tenets of the science of reading, in my opinion, is adopting that results-oriented mindset and putting in management practices to assure that you get the results that you want. That's, in my experience, is the number one differentiator between organizations, including school districts, that succeed and those that just try hard and don't get the results, is the ones that put in those management practices to ensure that that intention gets translated into action in classrooms. And if you do that, then you'll probably get results. If you don't do that, you might or you might not.
What then do you do if the superintendent doesn't meet those targets that you've set as the school board?
Well, it's no different from any other organization. I mean, I don't think there are many organizations that say these are targets that must be hit or, your employment's going to be terminated. I've never been in an organization like that. Doesn't really make a lot of sense since things are complicated. But, we don't have a lot of specific goals. We don't have a lot of top initiatives. And so, I'd say if we weren't able to deliver on the top initiative, then that would be, something that we'd really take into account when we thought about this person's continued performance. Now, the good news that I can tell you, having just come out with the California Reading Report Card, is that what we're doing in Palo Alto, what the team is doing in Palo Alto, does seem to be working. And Palo Alto was the most improved district in California on the California Reading Report Card.
Congratulations.
And in a year, the average district that we tracked went down 8 percentage points in terms of meet and exceed, low-income Latino students meeting and exceeding grade level. Palo Alto in that same period went up by 9 percentage points. And we went from the bottom 5% of all school districts in California to, I think we're about 71st out of 300. So in the top 25% now. And we're not nearly done. I mean, we're just getting started. But I do think my takeaway from that as a board member and as a reading advocate is that their efforts, really concerted efforts, changing curriculum, changing assessment, changing intervention tools, dyslexia screening, training for all the teachers involved and all the administrators, and a real commitment from the very top, from the board, from the superintendent, over and over again, that this is one of our top priorities that we want to focus on. It has the desired result. And so, like I said earlier, I think the focus and the management processes behind it are at least as important as the specific tools that you use. My guess is if you use the best tools, you'll probably go further. But when you're just getting started, I think the main thing is to focus on the management practices and the establishing in everybody's mind that this is the top priority. And if everybody's focused on it, then like you said earlier, what gets measured gets managed.
So that is an incredible feat in a district. And so that That's very exciting. I love hearing that. And those little nuggets help you to convey that story. So you're working in Palo Alto and you're making strides there, but you then went off and started the California Reading Coalition. Tell us about that.
Well, I'll be honest. I'm elected to the school board here. We have about a little over 10,000 kids in our school district, about 1,500 of whom are low income or high need students, as they say in California. And, I'm responsible. So, I view it as the effort I was doing was basically doing my job as an elected official. But I was very cognizant that, hey, I'm working really hard to try to understand this reading problem. And, hopefully the 1,500 kids that the 1,500 low-income that we serve benefit. But there are over 3 million low-income kids in California, 6 million total K-12 students. And it's like, it seemed to me, based on, as I talked to more people around the state trying to learn more about what they did to try to understand our Palo Alto situation. It's like, hey, the same problem we have in Palo Alto, they have everywhere. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, I've got to figure out how to scale up my efforts, because helping 1,500 kids is great. But when there are 1.5 million kids or 3 million kids that have the same situation, I've got to figure out how to do more. And so as I went around California, I found, I talked to people all over the country. I learned a lot about how things went in Mississippi. I know a lot of people in Mississippi now. I'm a great admirer of the programs and success they've had there. And I do think virtually all of us would be better off if we followed pretty closely the path that they've blazed, because they are one of the only places that have gotten, the Mississippi Miracle is at this point almost unique to Mississippi. Other places have not yet replicated it. And if we did, we would all be happier and better off. So anyway, I'd focused a lot on other places that were trying to do a good job, but I was finding pockets of people in California that were working on this problem too. Now, California is a big place, but I wasn't finding many pockets, but they were definitely there. And the thing that struck me is that as I talked to some of these people, I'd meet one and then I'd meet another. They barely knew about each other. Yeah. They never talked. And they were each kind of working in their own little part of the problem. And I said, well, I'm not an educator, or I'm not a professional at this, but I know how to set up conference calls. So what I'll do is I'll try to get a bunch of these people on a conference call, and we can at least figure out who each other are and see if there are things that we can usefully do together. And so that first call was in maybe March of 2021. So about 2 years ago. And I think we had 10 or 12 people on the call, and it seemed to go well, and we agreed we'd had another call. So the next call, we were more ambitious. I tried to get more people from other parts of the state. And we had, I think, 5 or 6 districts present little 15 or 20 minute presentations about what they were doing in their district. And these were districts that were actually trying to do things in California. I think 6 was all I found out of 1,000 school districts in California. Mm. And what was great about it is we had 36 people on that call. And it was a 2-hour call. All 36 stayed for the entire 2 hours. And I was like, wow, there's a market here for this. People want this kind of information. People are really interested in this. And so, after that, we agreed pretty quickly. That was probably in July of 22. We said, or 21. And we said, we should have a conference. And I said to the person I was talking to, we should organize a conference. And he said, there must already be a conference. And I said, if there is already a conference, doing a terrible job because neither one of us know anything about it. And so we ended up organizing, and what I knew, I'd never organized a conference in my life. I had no idea how to do any of this. But, what was clear was that a lot of people were interested in this topic, and there wasn't many ways to get the information in California. So we organized what came to be called the first California Reading Summit, which was in October of 21. And I remember I said, hey, if 100 people come to this, and this was a virtual event, it was 2021, everything was virtual. I said, if 100 people come, I'll be thrilled. This will be great. And we'll get a bunch, I invited a bunch of speakers, organized a bunch of panels, the usual conference stuff. We had over 500 people sign up for that event. After, we had maybe 6 weeks between the time we decided we were going to have it and when we had it. And we had 500 people sign up, over 300 people attended. It was covered in EdSource and got some media coverage. It made me realize, holy smokes, people really are starving for this information. It wasn't that our conference was nice, but it wasn't our conference was so great or we did a great job promoting it. It was that people were dying for this information and they didn't have any way to get it. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, that means this organization has a reason to exist. Our job is to make it so that people can get this information in California, that there's ways for them to find out about what's going on in the science of reading and figure out how to bring that to their district, figure out what other districts are doing, figure out what other people are doing, and importantly, take these real disparate efforts and try to align and amplify them. Because ultimately, what we'd seen in other places is the real game here is state policy. And there are 1,000 school districts in California. You're never going to change 1,000 school districts, one school district at a time. It's impossible. You've got 40 million people. You've got 7,000 schools. Elementary schools. It's a big, big place. So we're going to need state policy if we really want to impact kids. And one of the things I said is that, we have these different little organizations. And what I didn't want to do is just create another, because I'm a real believer that if you've got all of California education and a few little advocate organizations, the chances of your having a meaningful, sustained impact is pretty low. So what you want to do is kind of coalesce your efforts, as they say, put all your wood behind one arrow, and try to really figure out what it is you're trying to accomplish and align everybody around trying to accomplish that. So that's the ultimate goal of one goal is to inform and mobilize people, but the other goal ultimately is to align these different advocacy groups around state policy that can change the way reading instruction works and the way we train teachers for all kids, not just the school districts that are willing to kind of push ahead on it now. And that's what we're working on. That's going to take a long time. It's not easy. I know in Ohio where you are, you've made a lot of progress this year. I think it'll be a number of years before we make the kind of progress that we want to make. But that's okay. We've got to, it takes time to change.
Well, and I will tell you that pulling groups together, just as you said, I found all these little silos, all these people feverishly working in their own districts. And once we're primarily parent group based. So what we do is to go in and work with parents in a district to form a professional organization where they can shift their district to the science of reading. But once we do that, then we bring them together in something called OH-KID, or Ohio Kids Identified with Dyslexia. And that's where we work on statewide issues. So the dyslexia legislation, the dyslexia guidebook, and that has been very helpful. But I will say that in my opinion, working at a district level is as important, if not more so, than legislatively, because we already have federal law. IDEA already requires child find and FAPE. State laws are also wonderful because they give you the guidelines and kind of help. They are necessary, but unless you have parent groups on the ground where the children are actually receiving and the curriculum is actually being implemented, I think they're a critical part of the equation. And without them, I don't think it'll happen.
I agree. I think you need both.
Yeah.
I think ultimately you need both. And that's, I mean, when you look at school districts that are effective, it's ultimately because the parents are engaged in making sure the school district meets their needs. If there aren't, it's very hard to have, if the people who are running the organization don't feel that constant pressure from the outside to perform, it's like, even despite the best intentions and the most professionalism, it's just you're going to take your foot off the gas. That's just the way the world works. And so the only thing, it's funny, I remember vividly talking, one of the things I like about the California Reading Report Card is it gives me an excuse to call a lot of districts that I wouldn't talk to otherwise and hear about what they're doing. I have a lot of fun calling up districts. I usually talk to all the districts in the top 30. And I call them up and I say, congratulations, you're, one of the top 30 districts in California. I'd love to talk to you about what you're doing. And I have these really interesting conversations with them about how they see themselves achieving these results. And I remember there's I think the Hawthorne, a district in Los Angeles, right near the airport, a low income area with a very high percentage of Latino families. And I remember talking to the superintendent there and said, are you, how it seems like you have very high student achievement. Why are you so focused on student achievement? Because not all districts are. And she said, my parents would go bananas if I didn't focus on student achievement. My board is laser focused on student achievement. And I have my job because they think I can deliver. And that was really striking for me because, like I said, not all districts focus on student achievement. I mean, it seems like a weird thing to say, especially to people outside education. But most educators know that that's not, most school boards do not spend most of their school board meeting poring over student achievement numbers, trying to figure out where they're deficient and how to do better. That's not what they spend their time on. And if you don't, well, that's why you don't get the result. But when I talk to the districts that do get those results, that's what they spend their time on. Bonita Unified, who I mentioned before, this is fascinating to me. Two fun facts about Bonita Unified. One is they've got a logo like a lot of schools, like a lot of districts. Their logo has 3 mottos on it. One, I forget what 2 of them are. The third one is measurable results. And it's like, really? That's in your logo? So it's incredible. And then the other thing is that in 2010, before any of this, before Science of Reading, Mississippi, Emily Hanford, any of it, their board adopted a 90% reading proficiency goal. And so it's not a surprise. When I first called them, they were the #1 school district in the state in the earlier report card that we did. And when I first called them and told them congratulations, you're at the top of our list, they were pleased, but not the least bit surprised, because they were like, yeah, we've been working on this for years. And we know we are good at it, not as good as we'd like to be, but we are really good at it. But we're good at it because we've worked it super hard and we focus on results. So I think that's one of the things that actually encouraged me, because it said there was nothing superhuman about the districts here that succeed. They succeed because they make it a priority and they focus on results. That's it. That's the secret.
Well, I want everybody to hear that, because we need the secret. I talk to families all the time whose kids are struggling. When you talk about you get the behavior that you measure, or whatever you said, what did you say?
I think it's the old Peter Druckerism. What gets measured gets managed.
Managed. Okay. We one of the things that we have put into our mission statement is that children on IEPs graduate at commensurate levels as, kids that are not on IEPs. Is that anything that you all measure?
We do measure it. In the sense that the state, we have that data. That has not been one of our top priorities. And that has not been one of our top priorities.
Okay.
IEPs, you probably understand more this better than I do. As a parent of a student who's a severely disabled student, I have kind of a narrow window into the world of kids with disabilities. And there are some kids that are going to struggle to achieve academically. That's just the nature of disabilities. Many kids are not. Many kids are, going to be able to achieve whatever, there should be no difference in their achievement. I always find it hard to sort out whether all districts have the same mix of IEP kids, because parents don't arrange themselves. My family moved to Palo Alto because of the special ed program. We were looking for a place that we thought could fund the needs of my son, and we thought Palo Alto would be able to fund not just meet his needs, but fund his needs if he needed outside programs, that they were not going to be unable to meet his needs. And I think there are other people in our community that move here because of the special ed budgeting. It's a budget consideration. So I think that whenever I compare districts like that, I always worry if the student mix is the same. But generally speaking, I agree with you. I think if to the extent that the mixes are the same, you should see very high performance. If you're not serving you can't be a great school district unless you serve your most challenged and least resource students. The least resource are the ones with low income. The most challenged are the ones with disabilities. So you ought to be, you need to focus on serving them both, because if you can't be a great school district unless you do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the interesting thing that I've learned doing this work for the last decade, it's my hobby like it is your hobby, is that children with dyslexia might need structured literacy. It may be critical for them to learn to read, but if you get it right for dyslexic kids, you're going to get it right for all kids. The curriculum casualties who might not be dyslexic, but are, the other part of the students who are not proficient readers, those kids need structured literacy too. Maybe not as many repetitions, but they need that as well. So I think that if you're looking at IEP kids, maybe it'd be better to look at dyslexic students, because they are the canaries in the coal mine, and they actually, and building that knowledge in a district, it will then spread, because they actually really have to learn how kids learn how to read.
Well, and that's why, in our district, and this wasn't something I was directly involved in, but we sent all of our teachers to Orton Gillingham training, which, as you know, is a very common tier 2, tier 3 intervention for kids with dyslexia.
So reg ed too, regular education?
Oh, every teacher.
Wow.
Literally every teacher. Every teacher and every principal, every elementary principal.
With a practicum, and maybe not a practicum for the principals, but where what was the training?
I would probably mischaracterize it if you made me go into too much detail. It was the same thing we had sent our reading specialists to 2 years before. Mm-hmm. So, and it was designed, it was, the provider had designed programs specifically for tier 1 instruction. So it wasn't like we were giving tier 3 tools to tier 1 educators. It was OG for tier 1. but it was, it was OG. And we want, and that was, so yes, I think we were basically following what you were saying, is that if we lay the foundation that'll work for all kids, if it'll serve dyslexic kids, but it'll also serve kids who are struggling readers for whatever reason. And, and we're starting, it's hard to say when we've done a lot of things in a short amount of time and we've seen a good result. It's hard to point to any one thing and say that was the thing that generated the result. It probably was a combination of all the things. But there's no question that I think laying that foundation for all children was very valuable for kind of shifting the mindset of our district to about but the why it was so important to do this and the how.
And I love the idea that you trained the principals as well, so that I don't understand how you can lead the change if you don't understand it. So that to me seems critical. Was there also training for the administration, like the superintendent, assistant superintendent? Were they trained?
What we did, I don't know if the assistant superintendent of elementary, she was very involved. I don't know if she went to the training or not. One of the other things that we did that we hadn't done before is we appointed for the first time a director of early literacy, or she might be a director of all of literacy. She focuses on early literacy. She may be responsible for K-12 literacy, but we had never had this position before. And it was a principal who had been a very effective principal in our elementary schools. So she was well respected. She knew our organization. She understood our schools. She had a background in literacy. And she became the first district-wide literacy coordinator and has done a great job kind of driving the program and, doing a lot of making sure the training is right, making sure that the coaching goes along with the training, because training without coaching is not yet likely to yield the kind of results that you want. Engaging the principals and things like, classroom walkthroughs and grade level teacher group meetings, kid by kid reviews. So making sure we're doing a whole set of things that translate, these kind of good intentions and investments into changing practices in the classroom. And so, it was, like I said, I keep coming back. I think all this falls in the category of management practices to me. It's like, if you make it a priority and you put good people in charge of it, then some of these other things like choosing the right curriculum or choosing the right assessment or, sending people to the right training, those things tend to take care of themselves. Because if you've got good people, that's why I think it's not necessary for boards to prescribe that kind of thing. Just like any organization, you should take good people, give them the priorities and give them the resources and let them do their jobs. And I think that's what tends to yield not only the best results, but the most sustainable results. Because now it's built into the organization that they're doing the things that they need to do.
And that is interesting, because as the parent of a dyslexic child, the urgency is there, and it's hard to kind of wait for them to figure it out. There is a desire to say, do this now, because our kids are literally dying. But
I totally get that. And it's funny, because it's not funny, but I talk to dyslexic parents. I mean, I know many of the parents of dyslexic kids in our community, and I hear that from them. I was like, yeah, this is good, but it's not helping my kid. Or my kid's in 6th grade. This isn't help. The fact that you're doing all this great stuff in kindergarten is not really helping my kid. And they're absolutely right. I mean, that's a problem. But you can't. I'm an old person, right? I'm over 60. My kids are grown. I sort of have this longer term. I have this perspective that, the old saying, there's never enough time to do it right, always enough time to do it over. And I've lived that experience so many times in my career. I don't want to do things over. So, if it takes a little longer to do it right, then that's what it'll take. And it doesn't always meet the needs of particular kids, and that's heartbreaking. But what would be more heartbreaking is if 5 and 10 years from now, we were still not meeting the needs of kids. So,
because that is very tricky, actually. When we started our work, because that's the biggest bang for the buck, is getting the early literacy program in and working. But then you've got all these kids that come after, or that have already been there, who are too old to get great instruction in kindergarten and picked up right away. And so we meet quarterly with our district through the dyslexia task force. And each and every time we spend a few minutes trying to figure out, how do we help the older kids that we missed now that we know what could have been? Because I think we have a sacred obligation to those kids. How do you guys help those kids?
That's a big issue, I think, everywhere, that the enormity of it continues to be, it becomes more and more visible. We had a real stunning thing on our board. This was probably in 2017, maybe 2018. Like a lot of school boards, we have a couple of high school students who are non-voting members of our board, elected by the high schools. And one of the kids, who was a tremendous kid, super charismatic, super smart. We were discussing, it may have been that we passed the dyslexia resolution around that time. We may have been discussing our dyslexia resolution. And this kid, senior in high school at one of our high schools, said, "Hey, I want to tell you, I was diagnosed with dyslexia last year as a 16-year-old. And no one had ever, I'd always struggled in school. I'd struggled with reading. No one had ever told me why. It was either I wasn't smart enough or I didn't try hard enough, all the things that dyslexic kids hear. And then finally, they told me that I have this disability. And it was heart-rending. And this kid, what was wonderful about this kid is he's going to be fine. I mean, this kid is so capable and so self-possessed that, he was going to be able to make his way. But, it just underscored, here was a kid who was a senior in high school who had been, we had failed to diagnose his disability for 11 years.
And I don't know, but as a school board member, are you aware that your school district has a federal affirmative obligation to find kids with dyslexia?
Yeah, child find.
Yeah.
Sure.
A lot of people don't know that. It is actually the district. They have to, affirmative means they have to look. They have to find them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm familiar. Child find's a big obligation.
Yeah, and there's some teeth in that. That's what we leveraged that to move our district.
Yeah, with dyslexia in particular, it's funny that you mentioned that because, California is really behind a lot of other places in the country. We do not have universal dyslexia screening in California. And bills have failed in the legislature the last 2 sessions. There's another bill this year, SB 691, which is trying to address, the concerns that have scuttled the prior bills. But, the California Teachers Association has come out against it. Some other organizations have come out against it. And it's like, it's hard. One of the reasons we think that people oppose it is that many districts feel like if they identified a bunch of kids who were potentially dyslexic, what would they do then? And I think there's a real concern that districts don't know what to do, and are afraid to look. And of course, that flies in the face of Child Find, right? They have an affirmative obligation to go find kids. And the idea you're not screening for something that there are screeners for makes it sound like you're not trying to find them.
Well, and what I wish they would think of is the children whose lives they are destroying. I mean, in our little group, and not a little group, but we've had a suicide, we've had a drug overdose. So literally, by doing this work, you are saving children's lives. And so to me, that far outweighs, what do we do? I think you screen them and then you have the data. Then you have to do something about it. But we've got to help these kids, and we've got to have some urgency.
Yeah, looking away is not an answer.
No. And I would think in California with a dyslexic governor, does that not help you at all? Gavin Newsom?
It hasn't. The governor has invested, the state created a thing called the California Dyslexia Initiative, which has funded some professional education and some research. The University of California in San Francisco has a thing called the Dyslexia Center,
yes,
which is, among other things, trying to develop a tool. They call it Multitudes, that will be a multilingual screener for dyslexia. And it's being piloted at various places around the state. But one of the challenges is, even if you had a dyslexia tool and it was free, in the absence of a law that compelled people to actually do the screening, it's not clear that districts will actually do it. In fact, it's pretty clear they won't.
Well, and that's where parents come in, because do you have systemic group complaints or just complaints like to your Department of Education? How does a parent flex or, leverage the federal child line?
Well, one thing that you probably know about is in Berkeley Unified,
yes,
there was a class action lawsuit, which the district settled, and the settlement, which you've probably seen, basically prescribed almost a model program for the district to adopt in terms of both general education and interventions, as well as screening and identification of kids early on. Now, there have been real challenges because I think the general view of the court monitor is that the district has not fully embraced the settlement and is not making the kind of progress that they need to make to put the settlement terms in place. So I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but that's a powerful model along the lines I know that you've worked, where they did a class action lawsuit, won, and now are trying to create, in some ways, a model program.
Well, and I am in touch with the parents or a parent in Berkeley, and just as we had to do, again, it's important that parents stay engaged. We had corrective action that was called for, but we had to make sure that it was actually being done. And so if teachers were to be trained, were they being trained? How many were being trained? Who was and wasn't being trained? Were they listening to the material? And to make sure that it was being implemented. But after we babysat that process and we got new administrators put in place, we got to help build the district that we wanted. So I guess the message for me is, bring all these groups together. Parents can come together in their district. School districts can all work together. Groups throughout a state can work together to get legislation, or to just exchange best practices and learn from one another, a learning community. We have found that the districts that are doing the science of reading, we're actually, there's utility in just getting them together and letting them bounce ideas off of one another.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We did a thing last year with the Los Angeles County Office of Education. And here in California, County Offices of Education play a big role, we did a thing called um, reports from the field. And what we did, and we got individual districts, in one case, an individual school that was implementing a science of reading program. And we basically got their team and we created a webinar that was literally just their team presenting, this is what we did, and then having a Q&A session. And we pitched it as by educators for educators. So that, because that, I mean, when you talk to, we talked before about how educators view, parents as meddling amateurs, but they really respect and care about the opinions and the experience of other teachers and other educators. So this was a chance for people to see, hey, here's a district or here's a school that has really implemented these things that our district is talking about. What's actually happening? What's it really like? Those were enormously popular. I think they were, and rightly so. We're going to do them again next year. And I just think that's what, to create this kind of sustained wave of change, you've got to have these touch points for educators to connect with other educators around what they're doing. It's great. I think we as parents and we as school board members can get the ball rolling, but the real work of implementing this stuff is with these teams of educators. And they've got it. If they're not fully bought in, if they're not fully embracing it, if they don't feel ownership of the program and the result, then it's going to be really hard to both achieve the result and sustain it. So I'm a big believer in that. And as you mentioned before, teacher preparation programs, making sure they're aligned with the science of reading so that people come out of school kind of understanding this and they don't have to be, they bring that knowledge to their job as opposed to having to find it along the way.
Let me put this one last little bug in your ear, and then I want to be conscious of your time. Once you flip a district, we find that you can go in as a customer to a college of education from which you hire or a teacher prep program, and you can share with them customer feedback. And you can help them understand that what they are producing, these students, are not meeting your needs. And here's what you can do to help them meet our needs so that we don't have all this professional development cost. And in order for us to continue to do business with you, we are going to need some of these changes. And that's a conversation that will affect change at the teacher prep program level.
I think that's really smart. Teacher prep programs, they're businesses too, right? I mean, their job is to create. They're creating new teachers, but the biggest thing they're doing is putting them in positions where they can get jobs. And as you know, most of those are regionally oriented programs. They serve the local districts, and if the local districts say, "Hey, this is what I'm looking for," I think like any other provider, they're going to want to listen. So I think that's a great idea. And it's that one of the things I've kind of concluded here is that this whole thing is a combination of top down and bottom up efforts. You need both.
Yep.
And doing one without the other is never going to be enough, but you need both. And that's what we try to do here in California, is both mobilize at the district level and at the parent level, while at the same time trying to get the policy in line so that, the districts that are looking for guidance can get the guidance they need to head in the right direction. So you need both. That's why your group is so important. It's like you're really, we even if we had all the perfect policies everywhere, without the parent advocacy, it really wouldn't deliver.
When we're happy to help in California in any way that we can. So before we leave, I usually ask our guests if they have anything they would like to leave with our listeners.
Well, we talked about before. I mean, my main takeaway from the several years I've spent on this now is that the main thing that that creates results is focus. If many school districts try to do too many things. It's been striking to me in education versus other areas that I've worked in before, is that and I think it's because, kids are different. They do, like you said, they feel the urgency to try to respond. They care deeply. And so they try to do a lot of things at once. And that's a hard thing to achieve. So my perspective is you should try to do a few things and try to do them really, really well. And then once they're fully instantiated, then you can go do something else. And that's my feeling about early literacy. And I think that's a great area. If you're starting out, it's like, gosh, I'm spread kind of thin. I'm trying to do too much. I'm going to try to do only a few things. This is an easy one to align yourself around, because there are things that you can figure out that you know how to do. You can get a lot of community and both inside professional and community support around doing it. The results are there to be measured. And at the end of the day that you've done something really valuable for these kids that you serve. So even if you've got a bunch of other problems that you need to work on, you can go home at night and feel good that you worked on this one. So I really urge people, and this is, part of my message that we try to promote in California, is that to board members and to superintendents, is that every district should make early literacy their top priority. And if you did that, then a lot of things are going to go well for you. You're going to see a lot of, as they've seen in Mississippi, where they see a lot of things going well as a result of their focus, back now 10 years ago on early literacy. So that's my main message to, my own district, to other districts in California, to anybody who'll listen, is that if you focus on early literacy, good things are going to happen.
Because it is the key to the rest of their life.
It can't go. There are other things there are other things that you need to do well in life, but gosh, you're going to struggle if you can't do this one. So, and we know how to, and as you know, we know how to do it. This is one we can be successful with. So, I'm a big fan of, there are hard problems and easy problems. I like to work on the easy problems. Because that way, you're going to make some progress.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sitting with us for an hour. Thank you, Todd.
Well, Brett, it was really a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you. Literacy Now is a podcast designed specifically for parents in our effort to ensure every child learns to read. Parents deserve a seat at the table, and we bring their voices to the fore. We invite you to join the Parents for Reading Justice community on all of our socials, and make sure to visit our website to watch our documentary and to take our masterclass. All of our content is free of charge because every child deserves to learn to read. This episode was brought to you by parentsforreadingjustice.org, produced by Brett Tingley and Keita Mascaro.